I gave birth to my first baby about 7 months ago, and it was honestly a dream experience. It was, of course, very intense, but I look back so fondly, and I just, in the moment, felt so proud of myself and so empowered through the process of bringing my daughter into the world. Of course, you can't plan exactly how your birth is gonna go because anything could happen, but I do think some intentional preparation, both physical and mental and spiritual and emotional, can only really help. I did a lot of the things that everyone talks about, but I also feel that I did some things that were a little more unique, especially towards the end of my pregnancy during my 3rd trimester, that had a huge impact on my experience. So I wanted to share those with you today. The number one thing that I would recommend to anyone who is pregnant is to educate yourself on the process of birth as much as possible. This actually started for me a long time ago when I was 23, I think, or maybe 24. I went through the certification process to become a prenatal yoga instructor. And I also am now actually a prenatal and postpartum corrective exercise specialist. That's always a mouthful. But for both of those certifications, I actually had to go through a good amount of childbirth education, and it flipped my world upside down. I can remember growing up and knowing for sure that I wanted to be a mom, but feeling absolutely petrified of the idea of giving birth. And I say that because I'm not someone who was naturally excited about birth and confident about birth. From a young age, it would keep me up at night. I mean, I must have been 8 or 9 years old thinking about how I'm gonna have to give birth someday and feeling terrified. But when I went through this prenatal yoga certification as a 23-year-old, I read so many books, I listened to so many podcasts, and the more I learned, the more excited I got, the more empowered I felt. I was enamored with the human body. I became obsessed with birth. I was so excited to get pregnant someday and so excited to go through the experience just because I feel like it's the most incredible experience that a human could possibly go through, to carry life and then bring life into this world. In talking with people over the years, I feel a common feeling that comes up for people in pregnancy is, I just don't want to know. It's better to not know what's coming because they're scared that it's going to freak them out more. But the opposite was true for me. The more I learned, the better I felt, the more confident I felt, the more I knew about my options and what was possible when it came to birth. And I really think that everyone deserves to birth the way that they want to birth. But for me, a big thing that I learned is about how labor and birth is a physiological process that our bodies go through. And while epidurals and other forms of medication can be fantastic, especially for those who really want that to be a part of their birth experience, they also come with some risk. Any intervention that you put onto the natural physiological process of birth carries risk. And for me, in learning about these risks, which I'm not gonna get into, but in learning about the risks, it just made me feel like I didn't wanna take those risks. I wanted to really try to lean into the physiology of my body as much as possible. So if you're someone who feels hesitant to learn about what might happen on your baby's birthday, all I can say is that I found education to be incredibly empowering. Another one of the most important things that you can do when it comes to preparing for your labor and delivery experience is being intentional when it comes to choosing your birth team. I think this is especially applicable to those who are giving birth in the United States. This is, of course, not the case for every hospital and every OB in America, but I do think in general, birth is very medicalized in this country, and it's viewed as a medical event that needs lots of interventions, needs lots of people to be hands-on, needs the bright lights and the scrubs and the hospital gown, and sometimes it does need that. There are emergencies that happen, and there are many cases in which we can be so grateful for our modern medical system. But oftentimes we don't need it to be a medical affair. If everything's going okay with mom, if everything's going okay with baby, is there a need to rush the process? Is there a need for an unnecessary episiotomy or for interventions like Pitocin to try to hurry the process along? Again, sometimes yes, but at other times, no. For me, it felt really important to find a care provider that wouldn't treat me like I was someone experiencing a medical emergency, but rather someone who was giving birth. I wanted to make sure that I felt an immense amount of trust with my care provider, that I felt like I could ask any question open and honestly and have a thoughtful dialogue with them, both on the day of the birth, but also in all of my appointments throughout my pregnancy. And I found an amazing group of midwives that were exactly that. There were 6 midwives on the team. I saw each of them multiple times for my appointments throughout my pregnancy, so I really got to know all of them throughout my pregnancy and then would have a familiar face on the day of the birth. It was just whoever was on call, which it just so happened to be my favorite midwife, which was just, thrilling. But I would have been really happy with any of them. All of my appointments were almost 30 minutes. I was able to ask any and every question that came up, and I never felt rushed through any appointment, which was such a nice feeling to have. And most importantly, in those final days and weeks leading up to the birth, I just felt like this team has got my back. No matter what happens, I trust them. And that trust can have such a huge impact on how you experience your labor and delivery. Even if things don't go your way, if you feel like you were supported and like you trusted all of the people around you and felt safe with all the people around you, that's the most important thing. Okay, so for physical prep, I did tons of physical prep. I actually have my own fitness app. It's called The Playground, and I built a prenatal strength and mobility program in real time with my own pregnancy for The Playground. And I loved doing it, and I feel it had a huge impact actually on my birth experience and my recovery process. The most important thing to me as I was putting together this program was that I didn't want to just be programming workouts to help you modify your movements while you were pregnant. I wanted it to be something that could really support the changing body as it moves through pregnancy. So to help minimize the aches and pains, to help with posture, to have some core and pelvic floor support. But I also really wanted it to help us physically and mentally and emotionally prepare for birth. As a creator, I feel so proud of the program that I put together, but more importantly, as someone who was going through it in real time, those movement sessions were my safe place throughout my pregnancy. I looked forward to them every single day. They made me feel so good. There's a strength program for each gestational month, and those strength classes made my body just feel so strong and stable, made my joints feel so good, and it never felt like too much. It felt like just the right amount of dosage to help support my body throughout my pregnancy. And then the mobility classes are so great to help with the common aches and pains of pregnancy, as I was saying, but there's also a ton of very specific pelvic mobility work to help open up the pelvis, specifically in preparation for birthing a child vaginally. Within the program, there are 5 birth prep mobility flows that are all like 10 to 15 minutes that are just designed to be done as many times as you'd like towards the end of your pregnancy. So I filmed these birth prep mobility flows, I think I was probably like 35 weeks. And then once I hit 37 weeks, I was doing one every single day. I would actually put on my Calming Birth playlist that I created, and I would listen to the Calming Birth playlist while I did these mobility flows. And they're just such a great way to work on your breathing, make sure you're breathing optimally, to connect with the pelvic floor muscles, to really create space, as I said, through the pelvis. It was almost like they became a moving meditation for me. So much so that when I went into labor and we showed up at the hospital and I turned on my Calming Birth playlist, it was like this trigger. When the music came on, I just immediately felt comforted and safe, and like I knew where I was and I knew what I needed to do, and I knew that I could do it because I had been listening to this playlist and doing all of these moves and breathing with them for a month leading up to the day. There's just something so powerful in thoughtful, intentional breath work and movement with you and your baby at the end of your pregnancy. One other physical prep thing that I did at the end of my pregnancy was perineal massage. Now, as far as I understand it, I think the jury is still out on whether or not regular perineal stretching or perineal massage at the end of pregnancy actually changes the elasticity of the tissues, but what it can do is really help with mind-muscle connection. This is something that you can do either on your own or with your partner. For me, I did it with my husband. We did it every other night for the last month of pregnancy, basically. And you can look this up, but basically the idea is you gently stretch the perineal tissues at a couple of different angles intervals for 2 to 3 minutes. And for me, the big thing that I tried to focus on as we were doing this stretching was connecting to my breath, making sure that I wasn't creating tension as I went into discomfort, but rather keeping my face, my shoulders, my throat relaxed, and relaxing my pelvic floor, because the job of the pelvic floor as we're giving birth is to basically get out of the way. We don't want to clench the pelvic floor. We want to let it release and relax and spread so it creates space for the baby's head to pass through. So that was what I was focusing on as I was stretching. Can I stay relaxed and let the pelvic floor go? Doing this with my husband was really fantastic because he was able to give me feedback of like, oh, you're tensing right here, or yes, that's it. I can really feel the stretch and spread as you breathe like that. And on the note of my partner, I think another big part of my preparation process was having regular conversations with my husband, Carson, about what I wanted out of my birth experience. It helped him get more comfortable and confident with what birth was gonna look like and what he could expect. And it also just helped us feel more bonded as a team. We were really viewing our birth as a family affair. Me, Carson, and my baby Murphy were all working together to bring her into the world. And it was just so exciting to talk about and look forward to together. Okay, next up, this is short and simple. Listen to as many birth stories as possible. I have been listening to birth stories for 7 years since I did my prenatal yoga certification. And I think the thing that's really powerful about listening to stories is that it exposes you to all the different possibilities that birth has in store. I talked about this quite a bit in my video where I shared my labor and delivery experience, but because I had listened to so many stories, I did not panic one time. Everything that happened in my labor, and there was a lot that happened, but everything that happened, I was like, oh, I've heard someone talk about this. Oh, I know this is normal. Oh, I know that this can happen sometimes. And that is so important, because if I had been sent into a panic with every single thing that happened, when I vomited, when I started shaking uncontrollably, when my contractions were 1 minute apart for the entire labor, I would have been in a huge adrenaline spike the entire time, and I don't think that my labor would have been as smooth as it was. And I think listening to stories just help us feel more grounded and connected to women around the world. We have been birthing for millennia. This is what we are born to do. Your mother gave birth, her mother gave birth, her mother gave birth. It's a beautiful cycle of life that we get to be a part of. Okay, so I want to kind of zero in on the last 4 to 5 weeks of pregnancy specifically. I did the dates, I did the raspberry tea, I did all of those things that everyone says to do. I still don't know if they helped at all, but why not? And I really love dates, so they were delicious. This is where I really dug into the mindset work, because the power of the mind is incredible. As I said, birth is ultimately a physiological process that's driven by hormones. The biggest hormonal driver is oxytocin, which oxytocin is the love hormone. It's released when we're kissing and cuddling and orgasming. But the other hormone that can spike quite a bit during labor is adrenaline. And this is our fight or flight hormone. This is the hormone that spikes when we're feeling unsafe or we're feeling scared. And the thing about adrenaline is not only can it slow down the flow of oxytocin, which can ultimately slow down our labor, but it can also cause us to perceive the sensations of labor, so the contractions, to be more intense or more painful. So I really wanted to do a lot of work to try to make sure that I kept adrenaline at a minimum and really let that oxytocin run wild. As I said, oxytocin is the love hormone. So one of the biggest ways that I did that was I tried to tap into my inner sexiness as much as possible. And I know a lot of people are like, are you freaking kidding me? You're trying to feel sexy when you're 9 months pregnant? That's impossible. But it's not impossible. You know, sex is a common recommendation at the end of pregnancy to help naturally induce labor. And I've heard a lot of people talk about how it just feels like a chore to them. But I was just very intentional about not viewing it as another item on my to-do list, but rather an opportunity to slow down, to relax, to feel good, to have fun, to connect with my husband in our final few weeks before we became a family of 3. And you know what? That little mindset shift really made a huge difference, and I loved having sex at the end of pregnancy. But this idea of tapping into our inner sexiness doesn't just have to be done through the act of sex. I think it can be done through anything that helps you feel more grounded and ultimately just feel good and beautiful and feminine. For me, that was being in nature, going on walks every day, having a daily gratitude practice, movement, as I said, doing those birth prep mobility flows helped me feel so sexy and alive. alive. Just generally romanticizing all the little moments in your life can have a huge impact on your mindset in the final few weeks of pregnancy. I also had a blessingway, which is traditionally a Native American ritual that comes from the Diné, but the whole idea is that you're celebrating the mother's journey from maiden to motherhood. You gather with your closest women and you honor and celebrate the beauty of birth. My blessingway was the most beautiful day. 3 weeks before my daughter was born, my 5 best friends came over and we had a delicious brunch. And then my entire pregnancy, I had just been feeling called to the water. I wanted so badly to swim in the ocean while my baby was in my belly, but it was winter the majority of my pregnancy. However, it was finally warm enough, so we all piled into the car and drove half an hour to a lake that's nearby so that I could live my dream of swimming in open water with my baby. And then we came back home and had a beautiful little ceremony. We sat in a circle, we announced ourselves when we were born and brought the presence of our own mother into the space. Each of my friends had brought little items of sentimental value to bring with me to the hospital to help give me strength and courage as I brought my baby into the world. We also all had candles that we lit together and blew out together and made a promise that we wouldn't light them again until I went into labor. And these candles would connect us and give me strength throughout labor, even though we were apart. And we also all painted beautiful affirmation cards that I hung up in my hospital room. I was also very intentional about building up a bank of coping skills that I could make use of throughout my labor. And I actually wrote them all down and gave that card to my husband so that he could refer to it on the day of. Especially knowing that I was going to be giving birth at a hospital, there were going to be moments of chaos. There were going to be moments where my adrenaline spiked a little bit. So I just wanted to easily have things that I could make use of to help reground me and help tap back into that oxytocin. I knew dancing to music that I loved was going to be one of them. And oh boy, was it. If you haven't listened to my birth story, you have to check it out. I loved dancing throughout my labor. Talk about feeling sexy. I also knew that vocalization was going to be a big thing for me, specifically low tones, letting my jaw and my throat relax. This can really help make sure that you're continuing to breathe, and it can also help encourage your pelvic floor to relax even more so, because there's this connection between our throat and our pelvic floor. I had researched a bunch of different coping strategies that people like to make use of, and one that stood out to me that I thought maybe I would like was making use of labor combs. So I just got a couple of cheap combs and had those in my hospital bag. I did make use of them. They were fine. I don't know that they had a huge impact, but I was glad that I had them. My husband and I also took a partner support class where we learned how he could give me counter pressure on my hips to help support me through contractions. And whew, I am so glad that we did, because that was my favorite coping strategy throughout labor, for sure. And then the last thing that I did in preparation that I don't think people talk about enough is I slowed the heck down. When I hit 37 weeks, I said, I'm sleeping in, I'm taking a nap every day, I'm going to bed early, I'm working an hour to 2 hours a day, I'm spending time outside, and I am relaxing. And I'm so glad that I did. Shockingly, the hardest part of my pregnancy was actually when I was between weeks 33 and 36, because I was very pregnant, but still trying to work at a pace as though I wasn't very pregnant. Once I actually slowed down, I felt so good in my body, and I think that that helped me tap into that inner sexiness even more so. Okay, I think that wraps up all the things that I did to prepare for my labor and delivery experience. I really hope that you found some helpful little pieces of inspiration throughout this video. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to go watch my birth story. It's a good one.